Okay, so this is going to follow up on Caitlin's presentation, and Nathaniel and I are just going to dig down into that question of how we envision our impact on our region and on the world, and how specifically through the use of an umbrella group. One of the most important frameworks that we've been thinking in when that's been informing our work thus far is systems change. And so next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly describe what we mean when we talk about systems change as a framework and as a goal, as well as related ideals to systems change. And then I'll turn it over to Nathaniel, who's going to explain how the systems change framework informs our target of an umbrella group. And can you go, I think, 2 slides forward now?
2 slides.
Yeah, okay. So systems change is a form of social and political analysis based on systems theory. Systems theory, if you're familiar with it, it's probably through 1972's Limits to Growth, which is sort of the classical example. But systems theory acknowledges and attempts to model complex nonlinear relationships between components of a system, as sort of demonstrated by that graph on the right. And so, for instance, here this graph is showing how complex and nonlinear different elements affect and predict, or can be used to predict, the trajectory of humankind. Next slide, please. So generally speaking, most applications of systems theory acknowledge, the very close interrelationship between the Earth system and then the, subsystems of economy and society, politics, or culture that exist within that greater system. For the purposes of our group, we would describe our understanding of systems change as a goal with the following phrasing. And so next slide. Directing the development of material and social conditions through means other than pre-existing systems. So as you can tell, our basic assumption is that pre-existing systems that are currently directing social material conditions are not capable of creating the sorts of change that we need to see, or that we would love to see in the world or in our region. Given the deteriorating material conditions that we're all facing and the social consequences of those deteriorating conditions, we believe that whatever power existing systems may have to enact change is only going to be continually eroded. Next slide, please. So when I think of these issues, I think of the term polycrisis, which describes the interrelated and interdependent issues that we are dealing with now, and that we can expect to be dealing with shortly in the future. Things like plateauing energy availability and increasing energy costs. Next slide. Higher cost of living and deteriorating natural and built environments, loss of social resiliency and cohesion, and simultaneous rising inequality, oppression, and fascism. Okay, yeah, go ahead, next slide. So as these material and social conditions continue to deteriorate, we're constantly exposed to the limitations of the institutions that we rely on to protect us, or maybe in the past people relied on to protect them. We believe that a continuation of business as usual is liable to result in something that none of us will be happy with, which is why we here are searching for alternative modes of directing social and material development. Next slide. Now, as we've seen, through that Q&A, we're far from having all the answers in the short term. But our hope is that our shared understanding, based on the 4 of us, is that, this is a change that has to begin from the bottom up. And our best hope of inciting widespread change is endorsing and attempting as many different, potentially complementary models as we can. So with the idea that maybe one community might not catch on, but might try some ideas that would inspire another. So that's part of why the umbrella group. But in order to do that in a way that we hope will lead to good outcomes, we just want to be very upfront about what our moral values are, and where we stand morally as a group. So next slide, please. So the issue, the reality is that in the past, a lot of countercultural movements and even communities have been co-opted, and have ended up promoting inegalitarian or even like fascist rhetoric, which is why we want equity to be sort of a core tenet of what we'll be doing. And the hope is that, by centering equity, we can proactively avoid like any possibility of, fascist or otherwise, inegalitarian forms of community. At the same time, given the poly crisis, we feel that we're all facing, we feel that resiliency is also a key tenet of anything that we would be building. And while these two things are sort of our bedrock beliefs, we also want to acknowledge our own privilege here in the US and our own capacity for unwitting destruction. Hence this last sort of key phrase here, which we sort of put in a longer form. This sort of goal of meeting our physical, spiritual, and emotional needs in a way that doesn't take away from other people's or creatures' abilities to do this for themselves. And this is really just sort of a corollary to equity that sort of expands the scope a little bit. But we really want to ground that what we do in the reality of environmental and cultural destruction that surrounds us here in the Puget Sound and, continues to proceed apace globally. And just recognize that even if, an individual community is able to create a comfortable and internally equitable space for its members, if it relies on the destruction of the natural world and the exploitation of people in other areas, we need to recognize that that is not a solution, and that is not going to lead to the systems change that we hope to engender. So I'll go ahead and turn this over to Nathaniel now.
Yeah, so that sort of outlines why we want systems change. And it sounds like a lot of you are kind of on board already on like thinking this umbrella group is a good idea, but just to kind of go into some details. I mean, we're kind of starting from the idea that individual action is insufficient. Like you hear, like if everyone recycles, everybody vote, whatever, then that'll change things. But that's not going to change things, as Nick was saying. That's working within the existing systems. Next slide, please. So I think we're all here because we're interested in communities. So that if we shift to communities, then we're sort of getting away from that individualistic mindset and thinking more of sort of collective solutions. And like in these communities, we can create a new culture. We can create new equitable social systems, especially if we do income sharing. We can do a lot of resource sharing and reduce our ecological footprint. But perhaps more importantly, in the income sharing communities, as Skye alluded to, we can create gains in efficiency so that we can increase people's capacity to spend time on organizing, movement building, strategizing, et cetera, so we can actually start trying to shift these systems that are making us all sick. Next slide, please. But also, like doing that within one community is still you're still connected to all the destructive systems that are supporting that, all the supply chains and the exploitative labor and everything. And the community scale is not large enough for these gigantic global problems. And so the real power in coming together in community is to use our collective voice and our collective energy to advocate for change. And next slide. And the more people we have, the more powerful we are. So that's why we're focusing on this umbrella group scale. And yeah, so we think this regional scale is kind of it's big enough that we can have a real impact in this region. By organizing this umbrella group, we're kind of practicing our organizing skills. We could maybe use those to do more organizing of different activist groups. You could go advocate at the political level, and so just this group can help us build those skills to actually do the activism we need to do, and eventually shift the economy and politics in this region, and hopefully have wider reach if people are interested in what we're doing. Next slide. so that's kind of why we're doing it at this umbrella group scale. But then there's a flip side of it of, well, why should communities bother to do this systems change work? Like, won't that just be kind of another thing like that's hard to, it's already hard enough to get the community going. Like this is adding another layer on top of that. Um, and I would argue that this could actually be a positive thing for the communities that could actually help the communities survive. Like, because the fundamental thing is people need to have a purpose. I mean, a lot of the communities out there are religious, for example. Like, why is that? People want to have like a larger thing that they're invested in. Um, so um, if sort of this global systems change idea is one of the fundamental pieces, like the fundamental reason for the existence of the community, then that provides a reason for people to keep putting energy into it. Like often there's a lot of energy at the founding stage because you're doing this exciting new thing, and then the community becomes just kind of a nice thing that's there and it needs to be maintained, and that's like not as exciting. But if you have this larger purpose of like, no, we need this community to stay here because we're still actively engaging in like creating change, then that could provide energy for people to like keep wanting to support that. Next slide. Um, and then similarly, like, so that's kind of at the community level. And then if all the communities are part of the umbrella group, then each community knows it's part of this larger systemic effort, which then it's just another another level of that. Then you can know that even though you're just one community, you're like part of this larger network that is pushing for change on a larger scale. And um, let's see, and like, I mean, even just by participating in the group, you'll be helping new communities form. Like that's kind of part of what the group is for. So that sort of automatically gives a reason for existence for the communities and for participation. And sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. Yeah, and I think I've already kind of said it. Yeah, so then and the goal is just then we can have this larger impact in our region. Okay, next slide. So what might this look like if with the communities focusing on systemic change? So there's a lot of different ways that could look. And again, like we don't have all the answers, here's just a few ideas. Sort of maybe at a most basic level, if people are already like doing things that they're interested in, they're already activists in certain spaces, just coming together with other activists in a community that can provide a supportive environment that can just help like encourage those activities that are already happening. And also in like rural communities, like you could host retreats, and like if you want to support activists on a sort of a larger scale, then like people could come to your community and kind of be a refuge for for getting burned out with all the work people are doing. That could be one way communities support this work. Um, um, we're also kind of envisioning the communities collaborating together and like sort of focusing on like, well, what is the economy in this region? Can we like try to figure out how to get more local, sustainable, healthy food available to more people? And like, can we collaborate with farms um, and sort of strengthen that that part of the economy? Can we maybe like advocate for universal healthcare in the state? Can we can sort of work on tangible things that could make our lives better and make everybody's life better in this region. Um, and uh, and as working in this larger group, kind of one of my pet ideas is that like I'm really interested in just kind of like coming together with other people and figuring out, well, what is the best way that we can make change? And so just even starting that conversation and having kind of a dedicated space and time to be like, okay, well, if we want to like make the most change, like what should we do right now? And figuring that out as we go. And yeah, so that's kind of what we have in mind for systems change within the umbrella group.